literature reading. Let's get started. So we'll light our candles. And I'm going to experiment with a different candle because I think I need more light in order to see properly. So we're going to light this one. And I tell you what, I'm running out of stick. And I do have water in my little sake jar, so you don't have to worry about that. Okay, so we're drinking a nice tea from India called CTC, Black Assam. And it's a really high quality tea for making masala chai or any chai. And it's very robust. You can actually boil the tea leaf aggressively, and I'll do a sip just for you. Alrighty, so I've been getting a few comments during the live streams, and I appreciate them, I really do. So let me show you the book, but I got to get the lighting a little bit better, and so I'm gonna actually experiment at some point. I don't really like the candles being this forward because of the risk of me knocking them off the table. But anyway, so this book is titled Shen Fu. It's an autobiography of his life, and it's a really nice publication. I've been reading it for a few days, and this was an idea that I had over a year ago to add live reading to the channel. So this publication is called Shen Fu. It's an autobiography. It was written in 1890. And so Shen Fu was a very interesting human being. And his account is 6 stories, all being told basically at the same time. So it's a real treat. And I think I like historical literature more than anything. But so to tell you a little bit about the book so far, Shen Fu was a guy. He married this schoolmate of his, and they had a good life, a hard life, but a good life. And in struggling in life, he questioned a lot, but he wrote his story. So it's a nice read so far, and chapter 3 was amazing, and it was very sad as well. But anyway, so I'll read the I'll read the back of the book just to give you a little idea of Shen Fu's life. So if you have any questions, you could put the questions in the comment section, and I'll tell you a little bit more about the book before I start reading chapter 4. So the back of the book, it says, 6 Records of a Floating Life, 1809, is an extraordinary blend of autobiography, love, story, and social document written by a man who was educated as a scholar but earned his living as a civil servant and art dealer. In this intimate memoir, Shen Fu recounts the domestic and romantic joys of his marriage to Yun, the beautiful and artistic girl he fell in love with as a child. He also describes other incidents of his life, including how his beloved wife obtained a courtesan for him, and reflects on his travels through China. Shen Fu's exquisite memoir shows 6 parallel layers of one man's life, love, and career, with revealing glimpses into Chinese society of the Qing dynasty. This lyrical translation conveys all the descriptive immediacy of the original. The introduction describes the ways in which the book offers a unique insight into family life, government, and the powerful role of the courtesan in 19th century China. This edition also includes a chronology, maps, and notes. So this particular book has been a delight to read. And let me just explain this. So the whole purpose of reading the book live with the candles and all is because It wasn't that long ago, before electricity, a lot of people, this was how they read. And when they had their work done for the day, they'd retire for the evening, and by candlelight, they would read. And so I wanted to capture that very essence with reading uh, on a channel like this. And I also always wanted to read. I am not the best reader. I am not a professional reader, but it's just like singing, you know? So, anyway, let's start chapter 4 of Shen Fu. And the title of this chapter is The Delights of Roaming Afar. Tell you what, let me see, just get an idea of when the chapter ends so I could kind of know where I'm at. I don't even know how many chapters the book is, but that is the appendices, as they say. Because we might finish the book tomorrow, or we might finish it tonight. And I could look at the table of contents and see, but that wouldn't be hard, you know. One of the things I really appreciate about reading with candlelight, you can't always see exactly what's on the page. And so it forces you to accept the fact that you're going to make mistakes. Let's see. That's the introduction. Weights and measures. I read that. Oh, this must be the last chapter, part 4. Because I didn't see chapter 5. Okay. All right. So it's only 4 chapters. How you like that? But we'll finish tomorrow. We'll read the appendices tomorrow. And yeah. All right. So let's get started. Enough rambling, right? Chapter 4, The Delights of Roaming Afar. Let me get a little sip first. All right. I'm drinking black tea. It's called CTC Black Assam tea leaves from India. I have traveled about working in government offices for 30 years now, and the only places in the world I have never been to are Sichuan, Chou, and Yunnan. The pity is that wheel and hoof have followed one another in such quick succession. Everywhere I have gone, I have been accompanying others, so that while beautiful mountains and rivers have passed before my eyes like drifting clouds, and I have been able to form some rough idea of what they are like, I have never been able to search out and explore secluded places on my own. I like to have my own opinion about things and not pay attention to other people's approval or disapproval. In talking about poetry or painting, I am always ready to ignore what others value and to take some interest in what others ignore. And so it is with the beauty of famous scenery, with lies in any case entirely in what one feels about it oneself. Thus, there are famous scenic spots which I do not feel are anything extraordinary, and there are unknown places that I think are quite wonderful. This is a record of the places I have visited during my life. When I was 15, my father, the Honorable Shen Fu, was employed by country magistrate Chow at Shanyan. There was then an old scholar in Hangzhou, Mr. Chow Shin Sai, whose real name was Chuan, and country magistrate Cho invited him to become a tutor to his son. My father ordered me to kowtow to him and become his student also. On days when I had no lessons, I would take little trips. One day, I went to Ho Mountain, a little more than 10 li from the city. You cannot reach it by land. Nearing the mountain, you could see a stone cave with a slab of rock above it that was split in half horizontally and looked as if it was about to collapse. If you rowed your boat in underneath the rock and into the cave, you entered a pool surrounded by high stone cliffs. This was called the Water Garden. By the water's edge, someone had built a stone pavilion 5 spans long. Opposite it, the three characters admire fish jumping were inscribed on the stone. No one knew how deep the water was, and people said that huge fish lurked on the bottom. I threw out some bait to see what would happen, but only a few small fish rose to it. Behind the pavilion, there was a path to the land garden, but there boasted only disorderly piles of small stones made up into an artificial rockery, some of the creations as wide as the palm of a hand. Some tall stone pillars with a large rock fixed on top. The chisel marks still remained on all of them, however, and they were not in the least attractive. Having finished my tout, I had something to eat at the water pavilion, and told my servant to set off some exploding bamboo that made a huge noise which all the mountain answered, as if they heard a clap of thunder. This is how I came to enjoy traveling in my youth. It is a pity that I was not able to visit the orchard pavilion or Yu's tomb, and I regret it to this day. During the next year at Shanyin, my teacher decided he did not want to live so far from his parents because they were growing old, and he moved home. I accompanied him to Hangzhou, and thus was able to enjoy visits to the lovely scenery of the Westlake district there. For beauty of design, I think Westlake's Dragon Well is best, while the little prairie gardens are the next most attractive. Of the mountains in the district, I prefer the flying peak of Tianqiu and the auspicious stone cave on City God Mountain. I also enjoyed the Jade Spring among the lakes and streams there, because its waters are clear, its fish are abundant, and its liveliness is a delight. Probably the least enjoyable place at Westlake is the Agate Temple at Colin. Similarly, the pavilion in the lake and Liui Spring both have their attractions, more than I can describe in fact, but neither can rid itself of the atmosphere of a heavily made-up woman. Neither has the pleasant seclusion of the cottage of tranquility, which is heavenly. While I was at Westlake, the local people pointed out to me Sao's grave beside the Sling Bridge. At that time, it was covered with only half a mound of yellow earth. But in the 45th year of the reign of Emperor Qingling, His Majesty was inspecting the South and asked about it. By the time the great ceremonies were held for his next trip south in the spring of 1784, a stone monument had been put up at her grave, octagonal in shape and with a tombstone mounted on it with a large inscription, "The grave of Su Sao Sao of Qing Tang." Since then, poets remembering her have hardly had to wonder about searching for her grave. I cannot help but think of the countless chaste and virtuous women who since ancient days have been buried without being remembered, and of the many who have been remembered for only a short time, yet while this Sao Sao was nothing but a sing-song girl. Everyone since the Southern Qi dynasty has known of her. Is this because of her spirit is supposed to make the ladies and mountains more beautiful? A few steps north of the bridge was the Chungwen Academy, where I once took examinations with my fellow students. Chao Chi. It was summer then, and the days were long. We rose very early and went out by the Qingtang Gate, past the Chao-Ching Temple, to the Tuan Bridge, where we sat on the stone balustrade. The sun was just coming up, and the dawn light behind the willows was most beautiful. A gentle breeze arose, wafting to us the fragrance of the white lotus flowers, and refreshing both mind and body. We walked on to the academy, still managing to arrive before the examination questions were issued. In the afternoon, we handed in our papers, and I went with Chi Chi to cool off at Purple Cloud Cave. It was big enough to hold several dozen people, and there was a gap in the rocks at the top that let in a shaft of sunlight. A man had set up some small tables and low chairs to sell wine there, so we loosened our robes and had something to drink, eating delicious dried venison, along with freshwater chestnuts and lotus root. We left the cave slightly drunk. Above us is Sunrise Terrace, said Chi Chu, which is very high and has a grand view of the countryside all around. Why don't we take a climb up there? The idea appealed to me so much. And so we barely climbed into the peak. From there, Westlake looked like a mirror, while the city of Hangzhou was as small as a ball, and the Qing Tang River looked like a belt. We could see for hundreds of li, quite the most wonderful vista I have ever seen. We sat there a long time, coming down the mountain hand in hand, as the sun was setting and the temple bells at South Screen Hill were ringing. It was a long way to Tao Quang and Yunqi, so we did not go. Passing by Meng Minchu, we saw there was nothing special about the plum flowers there, nor were we impressed by the ironwood trees at the Cuckoo Temple. I had thought that Purple Sun Cave would be worth seeing, so we looked around and found it. But the mouth of the cave was only the size of a finger. There was nothing there but a little water bubbling out of it. There are the tales that tell of huge cave inside, but unfortunately, I was unable to find a way into it. On the Qingming festival, a teacher went to offer the spring prayers and to sweep his ancestors' graves, and took me along on the trip. The graves were on Tungyou Mountain at a place in the countryside where there were many bamboo trees. The gravekeeper dug up bamboo shoots which had not yet grown up out of the ground, and they looked like pears, only more pointed, and made soup for us. I liked it very much, and I ate 2 bowls. Yi, my teacher said, the soup may be good, but it can have a bad effect on your heart and blood. You should eat some meat to offset it. I had never liked the products of the butcher shop, however, and so continued eating so many bamboo shoots that I could not finish my rice. On the way back, I felt parched, as if my lips and tongue were about to crack. We passed by the Stonehouse Cave, but there was nothing much there to see. At the Pleasant Waters Cave, the cliffs are covered with wisteria vines. Pardon me. Okay. With wisteria vines. At the Pleasant Waters Caves, the cliffs are covered with wisteria vines. We went inside and found it like a small room, with a bubbling spring from which the water rushed. The pool was only 3 feet wide and about 5 inches deep, and while it never overflowed, neither did it ever dry up. I knelt down and took a drink, and it relieved my thirst immediately. There were 2 small pavilions outside the cave, and when we sat in them, we could hear the sound of spring. A monk there invited us to see what he called the 10,000-year urn. This urn was in the kitchen of a nearby Buddhist temple, had a bamboo pipe that let water into it from the spring and kept it full. Over the long years, moss about a foot thick had grown up on its sides, and since the water did not freeze in the winter, the urn was not damaged. During the autumn of 1781, in the 18th month, my father fell sick with malaria and returned home. When he was cold, he wanted a fire, and when he was hot, he wanted ice. I advised him against this, but he did not listen, and so his illness eventually turned into typhoid fever and grew worse daily. I waited on him with soup and medicine, never closing my eyes day or night for almost a month. My wife Yoon also became very ill and was confined to her bed. I felt terrible. There is no way to describe it. One day my father called me to him and said, I am afraid I will not recover. You have studied a few books, but ultimately this will not help you make a living. I am going to entrust you to my sword, younger brother Chiang Su Chi, so that you can continue in my profession. When Su Chi came the next day, I kowtowed to him as my teacher before my father's bed. Not long after that, however, we called in the famous doctor, Mr. Su Quan Ling, to treat my father, and he gradually recovered. Yoon also received treatment from Su and got better. It was from this time that I began studying to work in government offices. Why record these unhappy events here? I reply. I record them because it was from this time that I abandoned scholarship and began my wanderings. Mr. Su Chi's courtesy name was Sang. In the winter of that year, I went with him and began my studying the work of a government office in the Yemen at Fengsing. There I had a fellow student whose family was Ku. His courtesy name was Chen Ching. His literary name was Hung Kan, and his style was Zhu Se. He was also from Sochow, and as a person was generous and resolute, honest and not easily swayed by others. He was a year older than I, so I called him elder brother, while he invariably called me younger brother. I became very close to him, the first such friend I had ever had. Unfortunately, he died at the age of 22, and since then, I have been downcast and alone. I am now 46 old, adrift in the vast ocean of life. Shall I ever again in this life have a friend as close as Hung Kan? I remember that when I began my friendship with him, we were full of noble thoughts of youth, and we often talked of going to live in the mountains together. On the double ninth festival that year, Hung Kan and I were both at Socho. Our elders, Wang Sao He and my father, the Honorable Chia Fu, had called in actresses for a performance and were giving a dinner at our home. I just liked the noise of these affairs, so the day before I had agreed with Hung Kan to climb the heights of Han Mountain, thinking that on that day I could also look for a site to build a house one day. Yoon prepared some wine to take with us, and the next morning Hung Kan came to fetch me as the sun was about to come up. Carrying our wine, we went out of the city by the Su Gate and found a noodle shop where we both ate our fill. We crossed the Su River and walked to Date Market Bridge in Hang Tang, where we rented a leaf boat. It was not yet noon. We then arrived at the mountain. The boatman was a very good fellow, so we told him to buy some rice and cook it for us. The two of us then went ashore and walked first to Chung Fung Temple. This is south of Chi Sing Monastery, and we followed the road to reach it. The temple was hidden deep in the trees. Its gate was peaceful, and the monks had little to do. But when they saw we were dressed in ordinary clothes, they gave us no particular reception. Our interest was not in the temple in any case, so we did not go in, and by the time we returned to the boat, the rice was ready. When we finished eating, the boatman picked up our wine and came along with us, telling his son to look after the boat. From Han Mountain, we went on to White Cloud Villa. At Kao Yi Garden, the balcony there faced a cliff, and below it had been dug a small pond that was full of clear water and surrounded by stones and trees. Marsh grass and lychee trees hung off the cliff, and the walls of the buildings were covered with moss. We sat beneath the windows and could hear only the rustling of falling leaves. The peace was unbroken by the shadow of any other person. We told the boatman to sit down and wait for us at the pavilion outside the gate. Entering a fissure in the rocks, a place called a strip of heaven, we followed winding steps that led upward to the peak, which was called above the white clouds. There was a ruined temple there, of which only the towers remained, standing precariously. But we climbed it and were able to see into the far distance. After resting a while, we came down, holding on to one another. When you climbed the mountain, said the boatman, you forgot to take the wine with you. We didn't come on this trip just to climb mountains. Hung Kang replied, we are looking for a place where we can retire. 2 or 3 li south of here, said the boatman, is the large village of Shangsha, where there are some vacant land. I have a cousin named Fan who lives in the village. Why don't you go there to have a look? Shangsha was where Mr. Su Chai retired at the end of the Ming Dynasty. I said happily, I have heard that his garden is very refined, but I have never been there. At this, the boatman led us off. The village lay on a road that wound down the valley between 2 mountains. The garden on the mountainside and had no rocks in it, but there were plenty of old trees that had grown up and twisted and gnarled. The small pavilions and the lattice screens on the windows were all quite simple. It had a bamboo fence and a straw hut, and was just right for the home of someone who had retired. In the middle there stood an acacia tree pavilion. The tree was as big round as the span of 2 men's arms. All of the gardens I have seen, this one was the best. To the left of the garden was a mountain called Chicken Coop Mountain. Its peaks rose straight up, and on the top there rested a large rock, like the mountain at the ancient cave of precious stones at Hangzhou, though lacking its splendor. Besides us, there was a green rock, as big as a bed, and Hung Kang lay down on it, saying, from here we can look up and see the mountain peaks, and look down and see the garden. The view is vast and splendid, so let's open the wine. We pursued the boatman to drink with us, and were soon singing and whistling to our heart's content. The local people knew we had come looking for some land, and mistakenly thought we wanted a grave site, so they told us which places had good feng shui. It doesn't matter where we are buried, said Hung Kan. So long as we like the place, we don't care about its feng shui. Who could have known that his words would turn out to be a prophecy? When the wine jugs were empty, we spent the rest of the afternoon picking wild chrysanthemums to put behind our ears, so that by the time we returned to the boat, the sun was about to set, though it was late when I reached home. The guests from my father's party were still there. Yoon took me aside and said, among the actresses today, there is one called Lan Quan, who is quite a lady. You might be interested in her. On the pretense that my mother wanted to see her, I called her into our room. I took her arm and had a look at her. Her figure was full and her skin was white. I looked at Yoon. She certainly is beautiful, but her name belies her figure. Fat people have good fortune, Yoon replied, considering the disaster that befell her at Maui. I said, where was Yang Kui Fi's good fortune? Yoon then made an excuse to send the girl out and asked me, did you get very drunk again today? I told her about all the places we had visited, and she listened enchanted for a long time. In the spring of 1783, I left Mr. Su Chi and accepted a position at Wei Yang. I was then able to see for the first time the faces of Chin Mountain and Chow Mountain. Chin Mountain should be viewed from afar, while Chow Mountain should be seen from close by. It's a shame that while I often travel back and forth in the vicinity of the 2 mountains, I never climbed their heights to see the view. When I crossed the Yangtze River, headed north to the city, the line of Yu Yang about the green willow walls of Yangchu came alive for me. Pingshan Hall was about 3 or 4 li from the city, but it was 8 or 9 li by road. Although the scenery along the route was entirely the product of human labor and imagination, it was a natural and idyllic park, and the residents of the immortals could not have surpassed it. The loveliest thing about it was that actually the gardens of more than 10 residences that had all been joined into one, forming a connected whole that stretched away to the mountains. Its principal drawback was its site, which, while it was outside the city, still followed the city wall closely for about 1 league. To be truly lovely, a city should sit alone amidst rolling hills. As it was, building the park so close to the city was quite foolish. Still, while touring its pavilions and its tower walls and rocks, bamboo, and trees, the visitors found that all came into view most naturally, nothing being too conspicuous. If the designer had not had hills and gullies in his heart, he could never have begun to build such a place. At the very head of the garden was a rainbow park, and after a turn north, there was a stone bridge called Rainbow Bridge. I do not know whether the park was named for the bridge or the bridge for the park. When passing by in a boat, people called this place the Long Bank of Spring Willows. That this scenery was sited here and not close up to the foot of the city wall is a further illustration of how lovely the design of the park was. Taking another turn to the west, you came to a temple on a mound of earth called Little Gold Mountain. With this blocking the view, the atmosphere of the place became more tightly compact, something that is difficult to describe in writing. I was told that the ground was originally sand, and that repeated attempts to build up the mound had failed. The work was finally completed, however, by using several layers of wooden planks to hold the earth in its place, a project which cost tens of thousands of golds. Only merchants could have done something like this. Past the point lay the Shanghai Tower, where the river was comparatively broad and where people came to watch the annual boat races. There, the Lotus Flower Bridge spanned the river south to north. The bridge's gates opened out in 8 directions, and on the bridge 5 towers had been built. Yangzhou people called the latter 4 plates a warm pot. I thought the bridge looked as if too exhaustive an effort had gone into it, and I did not much care about the result for it. South of the bridge was the Lotus Seed Temple, and rising straight up from the middle of the temple was a white Tibetan pagoda. The golden fringes of its roof rose to the clouds, and the red walls of its halls were shaded by pine and cypress. From time to time you could hear the ringing bells of musical stones from within. No other garden in the world could compare with this one. Crossing the bridge, you came to a tall tree-storied tower which painted rafters and flying eaves colorfully decorated. Beside it there was a mound of stones, Lake Tai, and around it a fence of white stones. The tower was called the Place of Many Clouds, and it was like the centerpiece of an essay. Farther on there was an area known as Shu Hill Sunrise. This was flat and held nothing of special interest, being no more than an addition to the previous scene. As you approached the hill, however, the course of the river gradually narrowed and made 4 or 5 bends where the banks had filled in and planted with bamboo. It was as if that little world was coming to an end. But suddenly a great vista opened. Before you in 10,000 pine forests of Ping Shan lay spread out ahead. The characters Ping Shan Hall were written out there by Wei Yang Duke Wing Chun himself. What people call the fifth spring east of the high river was there inside a stone cave in an artificial hill. It was no more than an ordinary well, however, the water from which tasted like natural spring water. Another well, often taken for the real one, is nearby it, is in the Lotus Pavilion, and is surrounded by a pierced iron railing, but it is artificial, and its water quite tasteless. The Nine Peaks Garden, located at the quiet spot near the south gate, is in fact the most naturally charming, and I think the best of all the gardens in Yangzhou. I did not go to Kang Hill, so I do not know what it is like. All this is just a general description of the gardens I cannot completely describe. All their examples of beauty and skilled workmanship. They probably should be looked upon as a beautiful woman handsomely dressed, rather than regarded as one would a simple country girl. I happened to be visiting just as the grand ceremonies were begin, held there during the Emperor's inspection tower of the South. All the works had been completed, and the Emperor invited to visit them. Because of this, I was able to enjoy a grand spectacle, more magnificent than the one can expect to come across in a lifetime. In the spring of 1784, I accompanied my father when he went to work for the county magistrate, Ho at the Wu Chang Yamen. There his colleagues were the gentleman Chang Ping Chang from Shanyin, Chang Ying Mu from Wu Lin, and Ko Chuan from Tia Shi. We respectfully prepared a temporary place when the emperor visited Nantoyu, and I had the second opportunity to look up to the celestial countenance. Pardon me for a tea sip. Once, just as the night was coming on, I suddenly decided to return home. I took one of the small, fast boats used for official business. They fly across the Lake Dai, with two oars at the side and two sculls at the back, and in Socho are commonly called water horses, and arrived at Wumen Bridge in the twinkling of an eye. Riding a crane through the air would not be as exciting as this. I arrived home before dinner was ready. The people of my county have always liked festivals, but the lavish arrangements that day were even more extravagant than usual. The colored lanterns were enough to make you dizzy, and the songs and music of the pipes were overwhelming. Things of which the ancients spoke, painted pillars and carved beams, pearl shades and embroidered curtains, jade fences and embroidered doorsteps, did not surpass our decorations. My friends clamored for me to help them arrange flowers and to put up colored streamers. When we were free, we called everyone together, drank, sang loudly, and galley strolled about the town. We were young and full of enthusiasm, and nothing tired us out. Even though I was born in the peaceful times, I never could have seen such things if I had lived in the countryside. That year's county magistrate Ho was impeached, so my father accepted an invitation to move to Haining and worked there for County Magistrate Wang. There lived there a man from Chia Sing named Li Hu Chi, a longtime vegetarian and a superstitious man who once came to see my father. He lived beside the Tower of Smoke and Rain in a pavilion that faced the river and was called the Home of Water and Moonlight. This was where he chanted sutras, and it was as clean as a monk's cell, the Tower of Smoke and Rain was in the middle of Lake Ching, the banks of which were covered with green willow trees. Unfortunately, there were not many bamboo trees there. There was a tower, however, from which we could gaze into the distance. The fishing boats spread out beneath it like stars over the little waves, in a scene that was best by moonlight. The monks there made very good vegetarian food. At Henning, my father's colleagues were Shi Sing Yu from Pai Min and Yu Wu Chao from Shanyin. Sen Yu had a son named Chu Hing who was quiet and well bred. We never quarreled, and he was the second close friend I have had in this life. The pity is that we only met like bits of duckweed drifting on the water, and we were not together for long. While at Haining, I once sent to visit the Chen family garden of peaceful waves, which occupied 100 mu of land, and which was covered with towers and pavilions, winding lanes and galleries. One pond in the garden was very deep, and was crossed by a bridge with 6 bends in it. In addition, the garden boasted rocks covered with vines that completely hid their chisel marks, and 1,000 ancient trees, all of them reaching to heaven, with the birds twittering and the flower petals dropping to the ground. It was like a deep, it was like being deep in the mountains of an all artificial rock garden. I have seen that they were built on flat ground. This one looked the most natural. Once we gave a dinner at the Cassia Tower there, and you could not smell the food for the scent of the flowers. Only the smell of the pickled ginger was not overcome. But then ginger and cassia both turned more pungent with age. Like loyal ministers, you came to the great sea. There were 2 tides a day, which came rushing across the water like silver dikes, 10,000 chang long. Boats there could ride these tides, turning with the thrust of the oars to face them when they arrived. Attached to the front of the boat was a wooden plank formed like a long-handled sword. This cut the water in the front of the boat. As it parted, the boat followed the plank into the surging waves of the tide. After a moment, the boat will rise from the foam, and if its bow were then turned, it will follow along the crest of the wave, covering 100 li in almost no time. There was a pagoda on the embankment, and on the night of Mid-Autumn Festival, I went there with my father to watch the tide come in. About 30 li cast long, the shore from the pagoda lay Qing Mountain, the peak of which rose straight up, and one flank of which stood in the sea. There was a pavilion on the mountain top with an inscribed plaque that read, "The sea is broad, the heavens vast." The view from the pavilion was boundless, but all that could be seen were angry waves reaching the horizon. When my age was 5 and 20, I received an invitation to work for the county magistrate, Ko, at Chi Su in Huchou County. Taking the Changshan boat from Wulin, I passed prosperous Spring Mountain and went ashore at Zuling's fishing terrace. The terrace was halfway up the mountain, which itself rose straight up more than 10 chang from the water. Can the river at the time of the Han Dynasty really have been level with it? By moonlight, we anchored at Chikou, where there was an inspection office. The scenery reminded me of the Couplet Mountains. High and moon small, rocks rise from the low stream. Unfortunately, I saw only the foot of Yellow Mountains and did not get a look at the entire face of it. The town of Chisui was situated among 10,000 mountains, a small place full of simple people. Near the town was a mountain called Stone Mountain Mirror. To see the mirror, you followed a winding path through the mountains for about a li, and then came to a cliff with water rushing down its face, and the moist greenery that itself seemed about to begin dripping over the ground, arrived at a square stone pavilion with 4 high walls. The left and right sides of the pavilion were as flat as screens, and the light reflected from their lustrous green surfaces so that you could see yourself in them. It was said that once if a man looked into them, they would reflect what he had been in a former life. But when Huang Sao came there, he is supposed to have looked into the walls and seen the image of an ape. And then he set fire to the pavilion and burned the walls, so they have lost all of their powers. 10 li from the town was the great cave of burning clouds. Great slopes, twisting in and out, as in paintings by the woodcutter of Yellow Crane Hill. They were, however, chaotic and lacked order. The rocks of the cave were all the deepest red. Beside it, there was a small and very peaceful Buddhist hill. Ching Suku, the salt merchant, once invited me to go there, and we had dinner at the place. One of the dishes was meat dumplings, and as a young Buddhist novice stood watching us eat with downcast eyes, I gave him 4 of them. When we left, we wanted to give the monks 2 coins of barbarian silver as a tip, but the abbot did not know what they were and would not accept them. I told him that one could be exchanged for over 700 cash in green money, but he still refused to accept them, saying he was nearby where he could exchange them. At that, we got together 600 cash of water beetles to give him, which he accepted with thanks. I went back there with some friends another time, taking along a basket of things to eat. The old monk came up and told me, last time the little disciple did not know what he was eating and came down with diarrhea. But please, don't give him anything today. It is apparently sad but true that a vegetarian stomach cannot stand the taste of meat. To the friends who were with me that day, I said, men who want to be monks must live in this kind of secluded place, seeing and hearing nothing for their entire lives, so that they can meditate in tranquility. At a place like Tiger Hill in my home county, all day long there is nothing for the eye to see but bewitching boys and captivating girls, nothing for the ear to hear but the music of strumming instruments and songs, and nothing for the nose to smell but good food and fine wines. How could a monk there make his body like dried wood, or his heart like dead ashes? If you went out of Chi-Si, 30 Li, you came to Jin village, which every 12 years had a flower and fruit festival in which everyone competed in putting up flower displays. Luckily, I was at Chi-Si just at the time of the festival. But though I wanted to go, the town was too poor to have any sedan chairs or horses. So I taught a few people how to cut bamboo to make shoulder poles and tied a chair between them. Then I hired some men to carry it and went to the festival that way. Only my colleague, Su Tes Ting, went with me, and people around there who saw us traveling in our sedan chairs could not keep themselves from laughing in some surprise. When we came to Jin village, we found it had a temple, though I do not know what god they worshiped. In an empty area in front of the temple, a tall opera stage had been put up. It had painted beams and squared pillars, all very majestic. But when we looked at them from close up, they turned out to be only painted paper wrapped around wood and then varnished over. Suddenly there was the sound of a gong, and 4 men appeared carrying a pair of candles on their shoulders, each candle so big it looked like a broken off pillar. Then 8 men came out carrying a pig as big as a bull that had been raised in common by villagers for 12 years before being killed as a sacrifice to the god. Sing Ting laughed. The pig had a good long life, but the god's teeth are no less sharp for all of that. Still, if I were the god, I don't think I would enjoy it. But it all shows the simple, honest faith of the villagers, I counted. We went into the temple and found that the pots of flowers and fruits that had been placed in the main worship hall and courtyard had been selected for these unique natural shapes instead of having been trimmed and pruned. Most were pines from Yellow Mountain. Shortly afterwards, the opera performance began and the people flowered to it like an ocean tide. To avoid the crowd, Ti Ting and I left. After less than 2 years at this point, I shook my robe in disapproval and went home after having a disagreement with my colleagues. At Chi-Si, I had been in busy offices. Behavior was so low and venal, I could not bear to witness it. So I left official life and became a merchant. I had a paternal uncle named Wan Wan Chi, whose business was brewing wine at Sen Jin Tang in Panchi. Sen, Sen King and I invested in the business and became his partners. Wan's wine was shipped to the market by sea. However, less than a year after we joined the firm, Lin Shuangwen's rebellion broke out in Taiwan, blocking the shipping routes. Our goods piled up. We lost our entire investment, and I was obliged to return to official work. During the following 4 years, which I spent at government offices in Changpei region, I did not have one trip enjoyable enough to record. After that, we stayed at the Villa of Serenity for a time, living like immortals in the midst of life. While we were there, my younger cousin husband, Su Si Feng, returned from Eastern Wangtung, and I heard I was not working. When all is said and done, you can't for long eat the dew and plow with your brush, he said kindly. Why not go with me to the south of the mountain? You would get more than a fly's head worth of profits out of it. Yoon encouraged me to go too. You should take advantage of this opportunity while our parents are still well and you are still young and strong. Rather than constantly scrimping and saving, it would be better to ensure our happiness at one stroke. Having decided to go, I got together some money by borrowing from several friends. Yoon herself saw to obtaining embroidered work, as well as items like so chow, wine and crabs steeped in liquor, things that south of the mountains do not have. After informing my parents, I left with Su Fing on the 10th day of Little Spring. Pardon me. We went from the first Tungpa to the river port at Wuhu. This was my first trip on the Yangtze, and I had a wonderful time. Every night after the boat anchored, we would have something to drink in the bow. Once I saw a fisherman with a net not 3 feet wide, the holes in which, however, were about 4 inches across. There were iron grommets in each of its four corners, apparently to make it sink more easily. I said, granted, the sage taunts us. Do not use nets with too fine a mesh. But how can the man catch anything with a small net that has holes as big as this one? Su Fing explained to me, however, that these nets were specially made for catching the peen fish. We watched while the fisherman tied a long rope to the net, then lowered it into the water and raised it quickly several times, as if it were trying to find out whether it had caught anything. Before long, he suddenly pulled out the net from the water with the pingfish caught in its mesh. I could only sigh. Evidently, my quick glance was not enough to fathom the net's mystery. One day, we saw a hillock rise straight up from the middle of the river, nothing near it on any side, and Su Fing told me this was Orphan Island. In the island, frosty woods, halls, and pavilions rose one behind the other. Unfortunately, at the time, we had a good wind for passing it, and so could not go ashore for a walk. When we reached Prince Ting's pavilion, I found that it had been incorrectly described in the unreliable monograph of Wang Zhu An, like the Sung Ching Pavilion and the Prefectural Academy in Socho, which he wrongly placed by the main wharf at Sugate. Immediately below the pavilion, we changed a boat with a high stern and upraised bow called sampan, and on it sailed from Canquan to Nanan, where we went ashore. That day happened to be my 13th birthday, and Su Fing ordered noodles to wish me long life. The next day we crossed the Taiyu Mountains, at the top of which was a pavilion with a tablet that said, "Look up to the nearest sun," and to point out how high it was. The peak of the mountain was split in two, and there was a path through the middle like a stone alley with cliffs on both sides. Two large stone tablets stood at the entrance of the path. One said, "Retire from the heights before the rushing torrent," while the other said, "Having attained your desire, go no further." At the peak lay General Mi's temple. I do not know what dynasty he was from. People talk about plum flowers on the peak there, but I did not find a single tree. Perhaps it took the name Plum Place, plum trees I thought I had brought as a gift had already lost their flowers, or the leaves had turned yellow. Coming out of the pass through the mountains, I immediately felt aware of a difference in the scenery of rocks and streams. West of the pass, there were splendid mountains, but I have forgotten its name. My sedan chair bearers told me that there was a immortal's bed on it, but I hurried past, denying myself the sight in order to complete my journey. Upon reaching Nan Si Un, we rented an old dragon boat. Crossing Foshan County, we saw that on the tops of the walls around their homes, the local people had placed potted flowers with leaves that looked like wintergreen and blooms that resembled peonies. There were three colors of flower: red, white, and pink, and they were called camellias. It was the 15th day of the month of the winter sacrifice before we reached the province city. We stayed inside the Qinghai Gate, renting 3 rooms from a man named Wang in a building that faced the street. Su Fing's goods were all for sale to important officials, so I went with him, visiting customers and making lists. People looking for ceremonial gifts came one after another to purchase our goods, which were entirely sold out within 10 days. Even on New Year's Eve, the noise of the mosquitoes was like thunder. When people were going out to congratulate one another on New Year's morning, some wore cotton gowns with only thin silk robes over them. Not only was the weather here different, but the local people, while their physical features were the same as ours, were different in manner. On the 16th of the first month, 3 local officials who were friends from my home country took us with them to the river to see the Sing Song girls. This was called making the rounds on water, and the girls were called Lao Chu. On the 16th of the first month, 3 local officials who were friends from my home county took us with them to the river to see the Sing Song girls. This was called making the rounds on the water, and the girls were called Lao Chu. We went out together from Qinghai Gate, took a small boat that looked like half an eggshell with a tent over it, and went first to Shamian. The girls' boats are called flower boats. They were all arranged in 2 rankings, facing one another, with a water lane left between them so that the small boats could get through. Each group of some 10 or 20 boats was tied to a horizontal timber to protect it from the sea wind. Between each 2 boats was a wooden stake with a rattan ring around it, and the boats were then tied to the ring so that they could float up and down with the tide. The madam of the first boat was called Lady with the combed hair. On her head was a yellow framework of silver wire about 4 inches high, around which she wound her hair. And with a long hairpin, she had fixed a flower behind one ear. She wore a short jacket and trousers of black, the trousers reaching to her ankles. A towel of red and green was tied around her waist, and she had taken off her shoes. Her costume made her look like the actors of woman's parts in a play. She bowed and welcomed us to the boat with a smile, and pulled aside the curtain so that we would enter the cabin. Chairs and stools were arranged along each side, and in the middle was a large couch. A door led to the stern of the boat. The woman shouted that guests had arrived, and we immediately heard the sound of shoes pattering out. Pardon me. Some of the girls wore their hair in a bun, some in braids, coiled on top of their heads. They had used so much powder they looked whitewashed, and then had used rouge as red as a pomegranate. Some had red jackets and green trousers, others had green jackets and red trousers. Still others wore short stockings and embroidered butterfly shoes, or were barefoot and wearing silver anklets. They knelt on the couch or leaned against the doorway. Their eyes sparkled, but they said not a word. I looked at Su Fing. What happens now? I asked. After you have had a look, Su Fing replied, call one and she will come to you. I tried calling one over, and she did come to me happily, giving me a betel nut from her sleeve as a token of respect. I put it in my mouth and took a big bite of it, but it was terribly harsh, and I had to spit it out. Wiping my lips on a piece of paper, I found my saliva the color of blood. Everyone on the boat had a good laugh at me. Next, we went to the arsenal, where the girls were dressed in same fashion. The only difference was that all of them, young and old, could play the mandolin. When I spoke to them, they would only reply, me means what? Finally, I said, people say that young men should not come to Kwangurung to keep from being led astray by the beautiful girls. But who could be attracted by this gaudy clothing and barbarous southern language? The girls on the Chaochu boats dressed like goddesses, said one of my friends. We could go and see them if you like. Arriving at these boats, we found them lined up like the ones at Shemin. There was a famous madam named Sook there, dressed up like a flower drum lady. The powdered woman's clothes worn at her place all had high collars, and her girls wore locks around them. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop right here because I'm getting a little drowsy. So I want to say, yep, I agree, Grandma. It's time to go to sleep. So I'm going to stop right here, and I'll finish the book tomorrow. So we're reading Shen Fu, and Shen Fu is a nice book. It was written in 1890. It's an autobiography, and it's about the life of a man, and he explains the joys, the pains, the sorrows of his life, and a lot of the different jobs he had, and most importantly, the love of his life. So we're going to finish the book tomorrow, but I think I found a good spot to stop tonight because it is late, and I feel just like you when I read. I can get drowsy. So I don't want to butcher the book too much, but I got to stop because it's for the best. So that's where we at. So I want to say thank you guys for watching these live literary readings. And I also want to say I'm looking forward to the next book that we're going to read. But this has been really fun. It's something that I always wanted to do on the channel, and I'm really enjoying this. So thank you for your support. We are reading the book Shen Fu, and we should finish it up tomorrow. So one more thing to do is to put the candles out. And I'll see y'all at the next one. Thank y'all so much. And remember, y'all come back now, you hear?